Hi, this is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. So, this is the first in a new series of videos I'm going to make. I call it the Pentad series. And basically, these are whiteboard videos or blackboard videos or digital blackboard videos, however you want to call it. But the idea is that we're going to talk a little bit about how we achieve growth in 2025 for the Cardano ecosystem. So, first off, as we looked at the old roadmap, what we were trying to do is get to a point of Voltaire. And the purpose of Voltaire was to create a situation where the Cardano community is in the driver's seat about where Cardano goes. Okay, so you, the community, basically get to decide what the priorities are and how we think about Cardano and where we want to go. Now, we always had this idea that a government needs a judicial, a legislative, and an executive function, but the executive function was always a little milky. And the reason being is that if you're not careful and you don't have a strong enough legislative and judicial function, there's no one to keep executive function in check and restrain it from taking over everything and running everything. Okay. So you need some sort of structure in place. So about a year has passed under SIP 1694 and the Cardano Constitution. And now we have a very strong legislative branch and we have a very strong judicial function. Okay, so judicial committee, and we have the DREPs, and they kind of act as a check and balance. So after the fork incident, what we did is we said, hey, how about we create a Pentad structure? And a Pentad is 5. Okay, so there's 5 entities, the CF, there's a Mergo, there's input output group, there's the Midnight Foundation, and then there's Intersect. And why don't we figure out a try before you buy for each other and for the community? So the try before you buy is the Cardano critical infrastructure concept. And basically, there's this long backlog of stuff that we need. We need bridges. We need stable coins. We need oracles. We need analytics. Okay. And so forth. There's a list of things that we need that are critical for Cardano DeFi to even operate and function on par with its neighbors in Solana and its neighbors in Ethereum. So the critical infrastructure is kind of saying, well, all these guys together, they're super expensive, and also they're run by very competent business people. And as a result, if we're divided, they're going to divide and conquer, and we're going to end up with a damn mess, and it's going to be very expensive. So why don't we put a Pentad together? Why don't we have all these people talk with one voice, and let's collectively negotiate, kind of like collective bargaining, and have a conversation with all of these people and start getting ink on paper and sign deals and get the deals done. Meaning it's not good enough just to get them funded, but also make sure there's dev teams, audit teams, and other things, and then pair them with dApps to make sure that they actually get used. So all these things can get done. It would be absolutely bloody insane if we spend 9 months or 12 months doing all of this, working together with all these entities, and then say, okay, we're done. Well, just pack up shop and move home. Because effectively, for this to work, we have to figure out a governance structure and we have to figure out a culture between these 5 entities where we're all one team, we're all working together, and we're all coordinating, collaborating in that one team and working together for this purpose on behalf of the Cardano ecosystem. And what's nice about this is it's kind of pass fail. Either we got these integrations or we didn't get these integrations, and they're working or they're not working, right? When Circle, when this, when that, when this, when this. It either happened or it didn't happen. So this is a really good test function for an emerging executive function. And once you have a working executive function, then you can go to a slightly more subjective and slightly more difficult conversation, which is growth. And that's the purpose of this video, is to talk a little bit about what's next. What is growth look like for Cardano? Okay, so for the purposes of this video, you kind of have 3 metrics: MAU, you have transactions per day, and you have TVL. Now, we can argue until we're blue in the face of whether these are real or not real. And actually, there's a program that Jerry Maroney's set up with me, and we're getting a lot of people involved to discuss about a better set of KPIs. And one of the things that I'm going to propose, a member of the Pentad, is that once we have a final set of candidate KPIs, we're going to submit an info action to make them the official ecosystem KPIs. So we'll put them all together and say, these are the KPIs of the ecosystem. You guys on the legislative side get to say, check. And then every budget moving forward has to be in some way connected to growth in those metrics. That solves the ecosystem side of things. Great. But for the purpose of this video, let's just start here. Okay. So we have kind of two issues. One is we're missing the commercially critical infrastructure, the integrations, to even begin having the conversation about growth. We're basically an island. We have to fix that. And that's what we're doing as an ecosystem for both Midnight, for Cardano. Okay. Above and beyond that, then you have a list of about 10 to 15 dApps that are kind of showcases of the Cardano DeFi ecosystem. And what I mean by showcases, and I'm not going to pick dApps, I'm saying they exist, that if somebody says, what can I do on Cardano? You hand them that list. And you say, this is the list of examples of best on Cardano. And they bring something new to the table. They bring some capability to the table, okay? Well, those dApps, what do we know about them? They're underfunded. Okay, so they don't have appropriate funding. They're understaffed, many of them. They need more people. They don't have a lot of transaction volume. They don't have a lot of users, and they don't have a lot of TVL at them. Okay, so these three metrics directly impact the profitability of those dApps. And by profitability, we also mean their ability to list their tokens on tier one exchanges. What Midnight did is it was like a bull in a china shop. And as you'll see very soon, kind of opened the door for Cardano native assets and all the big guys. That was very hard and it took a lot of work, but it's done. So what that means is there's now an opening for these dApps, if they reach the requisite size, scope, and scale, to actually be able to get listed and be able to get to the next level of their evolution. So if you have this Pentad structure right here, the first try before you buy is, can we work together effectively to actually collectively bargain and get all these integrations done? The very next thing is we got to get our DeFi growth where it needs to be in 2026. We have to figure this out. Well, you start with a really good set of KPIs, and then you sit down with a unified strategy. And almost certainly that strategy needs to take what we already have and make it better. Okay, so we need to solve the underfunded, understaffed, and profitability. And you need to also solve UI UX and get that where it needs to be, both on the dApp side and on the wallet side. And then you need to work with them to develop USPs to make sure that they're competitive in their domains. And then you need to work with aggregators of capital and people. Okay. Aggregators of capital and people. So basically, you need to have a situation where when you flip the switch, tokens from many ecosystems can flow into these dApps, and there's a reason for them to flow into those dApps. And then also people from those dApps become sticky. They become inside the ecosystem. All right, so any good strategy is going to have an aggregator strategy, and this is where things like Bitcoin DeFi fit in, because that opens up the channel for capital and people. But also you can do the same for the XRP ecosystem, the XRPL. You can do the same for any of the UTXO cryptocurrencies that lack native smart contract capabilities. They want to get a yield. So all of those are aggregators, opportunities. And you got to improve the UI UX. And then you also have to work on the USPs. Hybrid dApps with Midnight really helps that, because that means every Cardano dApp can also have a privacy angle, which current DeFi really fails in that direction. So part of the Pentad strategy for kind of phase two, if we can find an effective collaborative structure and people like what we do, is to start talking about the DeFi growth and then start talking about identifying the top 10, 15, fixing the underfunded, understaffed, helping them gain profitability, and basically get them where they need to be so that they can get where they need to go. Now, some of this is also building up the capital base so that we can get XRP on the ledger, we can get Bitcoin on the ledger, these types of things. Okay, so that's with what we have. And then we also want to grow. So, you know what we need? We need bi-weekly hackathons. We did this in midnight, and look at the growth there. It's awesome. We can do this for Cardano, and there's already been some wonderful wins, like NMaker, for example. Patrick put on one of the largest in Berlin. He did a great job there, and there's others that are doing this, but we need to do this bi-weekly to showcase, hey, Cardano can roll with the best of them. And this also means that we can rapidly improve DevX. And then, in addition to biweekly hackathons, we need to have better aggregators for people and better comms for people. So aggregators are, we get people for Cardano into channels that are curated and controlled. So for Midnight, we're doing this in Discord. And we can also create a Cardano Discord, but maybe there's a different place for people to aggregate. But right now it's on X. And that's probably the worst of all mediums for a community to aggregate. It's filled with bots. There's tons of noise. There's a lot of toxicity. And also there's no real way to curate a community conversation. So you have to have a tighter aggregation of people. You have to have more checkpoints with bi-weekly hackathons. And then there's also needs to be outreach on the institutional side. So, you know, what needs to happen is we're building a comms channel for all the major analytics firms, the major institutions, the VCs, to give kind of seminars to tell them, hey, what's going on with Midnight? We can do the same on the institutional side and say, hey, Cardano is actually doing some really cool stuff. So you really think about this as like a seminar and a pamphlet. And the seminar pamphlet basically says, here are all the really interesting things in the Cardano ecosystem that you may not be aware of. The number one thing that I hear time and again, time and again, time and again is, I didn't know Cardano had X, Y, and Z. I didn't know that existed in Cardano. I thought Cardano was a ghost chain or a dead coin. Why? Because the vast majority of these people, they read their information about the cryptocurrency ecosystem from information aggregators like Masari or Electric Coin Capital or these other things. And if we're left out of the report, or the numbers aren't accurate, or they don't reflect what's going on, well, then we look like we're dead. So how can we blame them for having that opinion if all their information sources point in that particular way? So to change a narrative, you actually have to directly communicate and show them the real numbers and actually say there's something of great value there and kind of point out the USPs. So you need to aggregate the community. We need to start getting a consistent flow of hackathons. And then once we get a single source of truth and actually broadcast that, there's some narrative control that's basically happening. And then I already previously mentioned the event strategy where we say, hey, you know, let's try to go to the big four and every year replicate what we did at Token 2049. Okay, well, the Pentad could potentially do this type of stuff. Okay, so they can do the DApp upgrade, and they also can do all of this, but we can't do that unless we figure out how to work together and how to make all this happen. And this is my opinion as one member of the five. It has to be ratified through them. And if they have a difference of opinion, then that's completely valid. Good governance structure means that there's a discussion and eventually a consensus on all of these things. But what's nice is that this captures a lot of things. The Emergo has a very strong Asia connection, especially in Singapore. Intersect is the members-based organization. It brings up the entire community. I would also like to see Pragma representation there. Midnight is this incredibly hyperactive commercial arm that's super good at negotiations and deal making, and they want volume. So hybrid dApps make sense. Cardano Midnight are going to be its base market. And obviously, we're an elite engineering firm, and we kind of know how to put these types of things together. So with the right governance culture, there's everything necessary to kind of do this stuff, and there's everything necessary to kind of do this stuff. Okay, so these are ongoing concerns. So for our part, what we're doing right now is we're restructuring our internal Cardano units and input-output, and we're thinking about creating the Cardano business unit. And that will be our interface into the Pentad. And basically that business unit will aggregate our ecosystem side, our engineering side, and all the governance work that we do, and we put it into one structure. And that structure then can represent input output in its entirety and totality. And the leadership there will be custom trained and tuned to think in this growth mindset that we have. So a nice little restructure can kind of help and make us a bit more agile. The other big thing we're doing is we're investing heavily in horizontal capabilities and technologies. And so horizon technologies and capabilities means that we're reevaluating a lot of the languages and design decisions we made, and in every part of the stack. And we're saying, how do we make it so we can have higher velocity, lower maintenance cost, and we can also take advantage of the AI revolution that's happening? Google's writing, for example, 30% of its code using Vibe engineering. That number is only going to increase, and the code quality is going to increase. And even if it just matches or it's slightly inferior to an engineer today, it's like kind of comparing the vacuum tube to the transistor. In the beginning, transistors were worse than vacuum tubes, but the physics moved in a certain direction, and it was very clear that transistors are going to win out. And over a 5 to 10 year period, it's very clear that Vibe engineering is going to be a big thing. So you have a chance to amplify that business unit and double, quadruple, quintuple the productivity of that unit. And so we can catch up and deploy research faster to market. You're still doing the formal methods, you're still doing the peer review. You're just bringing something that would take a 5 or 10 year cycle into a 1 to 2 year cycle. Okay. So we're always asking that question. And we did all the testing in Lace as non-critical infrastructure to start. Now we're doing it in Acropolis. And after Acropolis, we can backport it across the entire business unit. All right. So this is kind of stage 2, is let's take care of what we got. And then let's think very carefully about how we grow the engine in a systematic and deliberate way. And you have many different touch points to basically grow that pie and get people very excited about why Cardano is special. And from the institutional side to the developer side to being able to coordinate with people much better. And frankly speaking, there needs to be a new ambassador program. For 2026. There already is one. The ambassadors you have are great, but we need more, and we need to re-up and invest in them. And the same for the influencer layer inside the system. We have to think through what we've learned from Midnight to add a better influencer layer to it. So this is how you build up a strategy. And how would we measure the success of it? Remember, we said that we're going to do an info action with KPIs. And you can look at some straw man ones like monthly active users. You can look at the transactions per day. You can look at the TVL, and you can look at the consumption cycle we have. What is my definition of success for these 10 to 15 dApps? If we can get them to a certain level of scale and safety, we have a lot of night token, we have a lot of ADA. Would I feel safe putting my own night token, my own ADA into that to get a yield? Yes or no? Cardano has an exclusive launch called RealFi, and this is one of the things that gets me very excited. RealFi is, everybody always asks, when Africa? Didn't you abandon Africa? False promises, whatever. Go fuck yourself. We never left. I gave over 1 million loans to people in Kenya and to people in Uganda, building out the RealFi model. That's going to become a dApp exclusively on Cardano. That's where we're launching. That dApp is built for a bear market. It's actually the ultimate bear market dApp. So if it's a bull market, it does okay. But if it's a bear market, it's probably one of the most popular apps of all time. Why? Because the yield is off chain and has nothing to do with the crypto market. So if you have predictable returns from off chain yield that have nothing to do with the crypto market, even if all the token prices go down 90%, the yields are still the same. And if all the markets go down, all the DeFi yields go to hell. So nobody can get yield anywhere. So they go to the places that are built for bear. So that's a bear exclusive. And that's an example of something we're building and we're bringing in. So we're going to be one of those 10 to 15. And it's part of the philosophical core and mission of the Cardano ecosystem, this banking the unbanked. And RealFi brings tons of new and exciting things to the table. We just had to get Midnight out first. The next in line is RealFi, and John O'Connor is getting scaled up for that. Well, as a venture studio, we're going to keep launching these experiences or partnering with people and upgrading people. Hydra is another example. That is one of our most powerful pieces of technology that we have. This truly can go 1 million transactions per second, and it's on a dApp by dApp basis. So the guys at Delta DeFi, they've done a phenomenal job of being the first mover in a next generation of Hydra applications on the Cardano ecosystem. So we're going to ask for those 10 to 15 in the dApp showcase, is there a path to upgrade all of them to be Hydra-enabled applications? That means all of them operate with Solana level speed individually with an on-chain footprint of just a few transactions. So they cost almost nothing for the network, but they basically enjoy super fast performance. That's the dream. So we get Laos to make the base network significantly faster, and then Hydra to make each dApp significantly faster. And if we're doing biweekly hackathons, we have a much faster lead time, tighter lead time on the DevX improvement of Cardano. So instead of these big once a year updates to Plutus, we get lots of little updates to Plutus and Akin to vastly improve the developer experience. We already see some of the DevX stuff on that agility with Starstream and so forth. So there's a really good plan, that's brewing here. It's just we always lacked executive functions, so everybody's like, whose job is it? Whose job it is? Well, this is an election, and I want to make it our job to do certain things. And it's not like asking for the whole world. I got to see if we can work with all these people. I know I can work with the Midnight Foundation. I know I can work with Intersect. I've worked historically well with Emergo, and I think there's a path where we can work very productively and effectively with the Cardano Foundation because we're completely aligned on transparent external goals. And we start with pass-fail stuff that we really need to figure out how to get done that is necessary for a thriving DeFi ecosystem, but not sufficient. Then we go to the next step and say, can we socialize a strategy where we think about these two sides and we figure out an event strategy, an institutional strategy, a people aggregation strategy. We figure out a DevX hackathon strategy, and then we upgrade 10 to 15 of these guys next year and get them into a killer state. We get them very excited, get them on Hydra, get them access to Bitcoin DeFi, get them access to XRP, get them access to these other aggregators. And then we can sit down and really drill in and talk to the wallets and make sure we have a killer UI UX and what we need there, and sit down and make sure these guys got some solid USPs. And the midnight angle is let's sprinkle some privacy on that because our competitors in Ethereum don't have that at the moment. And this gives us something unique and different from just your run-of-the-mill standard DeFi ecosystem. I think that's a pretty good strategy. But again, I'm just one of 5 in the Pentad. So as we kind of build this thing out, we're going to socialize this horizontally across everybody. But I made this video in the interest of transparency. We don't make decisions behind closed doors. We don't make decisions in some ivory tower and say, hey, maybe we should do X, Y, and Z. I just like telling you where my mind is at and where I'm thinking. Ethereum was very small back in the day. Solana was very small back in the day. XRP and Binance were very small back in the day. Just because they're big now doesn't mean they're invincible. Cardano is pretty big, all things considered. There are a lot of cryptocurrencies that would trade for us. And there's no reason we can't have exponential growth in this ecosystem. It comes down to, are the principles right? Is the philosophy right? Is the strategy right? Is the cooperation, governance, and coordination right? And do we have the right entrepreneurial set? And honestly speaking, I would not trade for any other dApp set. I think when you look at people like Sunday, when you look at people like Phil and Midgard, when you look at the MinSwap team, when you look at the Strike team, when you look at all these teams, these are people that are hungry, they're passionate, they're capable, they're deeply technical. They're just missing certain things. Maybe it's capital, maybe it's strategy, maybe it's market access. And really, if we unify together as an ecosystem, there's well more than enough resources, even at these deflated ADA prices. Because remember, we built Cardano on $250 Bitcoin. Vitalik Buterin built Ethereum on $250 Bitcoin. Solana built its current ecosystem in the shambles and flames and aftermath of FTX and the worst recessions our industry's ever had. There's no reason with the resources we currently have that we can't reach for the stars and get there and achieve what we set out to be. The delta is, can we coordinate, work together? And what this video is about is telling you that we have a brewing executive function that has the potential to work together. We inked a deal today already on integrations, which we'll announce later in the month. And it's kind of an appetizer for what's to come. But I have no reason to believe that we can't get all of the tier ones quickly. And, you have to gate them and stage them in order. And, smaller ones come first, and then the larger ones come a little later. But they're all necessary for where we go next. And then we move on to building up the Cardano DeFi ecosystem. We move on to getting these things where they need to go. Okay. And this obviously has to be socialized horizontally and then vertically. And what's really cool is that there's a nice debate process that goes through. So we're a little loose right now because it's a pass-fail situation, and everybody kind of understands that these things are under NDAs and they're very expensive. And we kind of know what the success criteria are. Either they're built or not built. Either they come or they don't come. That's why the proposal is a little loose. When you look at things like this, we can start measuring much deeper KPIs, like 26 hackathons then, if it's biweekly. The Discord, we can set a target of, do we want 1 million people in it by a certain date, and a notion of engagement. We can measure that. We can look at that. Institutional seminars, we can create a master list and say, did we give them across thing? Did we hold 4 major events? And we can then figure out what to do with the Cardano Summit, by the way, especially since it's now in Singapore around the same time as Token 2049. Here, we can take the top 15 dApps, objectively measure it over a 180-day retroactive rolling average, say those people in there, there's some sort of accelerator program that we put in, and we clean all this stuff up. Did we build all the capital aggregators and get them into play? And did we integrate all these things with our proprietary tech, so things like Hydra? And did we integrate all these things with these guys here so they have an incentive to stay around and move along? And then I'm going to keep launching applications. So I'm going to launch RealFi. It's going to be another Glacier drop. We'll figure out a way to get that. It's a dApp on Cardano, and it's a bear market dApp. It's built for bad markets. So it's actually very nice that we're launching that in 2026 when we're still in a bad place. And so that's going to be real exciting. And then, of course, we have Midnight leading the charge and opening up things. Now, will this get us completely done? No. But now that we have an executive function, we did 1, we did 2, we can then on an annual basis talk about what's the next surge, what's the next surge. And we can keep growing. And does this always have to be a Pentad? It can be 7 members. It can be 11 members. So as members get larger, as things build up, maybe 1 or 2 of these dApps get to a significant size. Why is Midnight here? Because Midnight is the largest and most prominent and best capitalized project on Cardano. And they add something to the conversation that none of the other members have. They know the experience of what it means to be a Cardano asset. They know what the listing experience looks like. They know what the development experience looks like because they live at the smart contract level, not the infrastructure level. All these people live at the infrastructure level. These people live at the Cardano asset level. So in many ways, Midnight is representing the voice of Snek and Hosky and all of the DeFi in the Cardano ecosystem. Midnight can't work if our DeFi ecosystem is broken. That's why they're there. And they also happen to be the fastest growing and the most commercially aggressive. And they're the ones who are really good at negotiating these types of deals. And if we speak with one voice, they get that done. You see, so each of these members have a real reason to be there. And the Pentad can grow over time as the executive function grows over time. But the end result is still the same. We have KPIs. We can ratify them by an info action, and then we can push forward. So if you're a D-Rep, you really have to take a philosophical decision. Are you looking for perfection? Or are you looking to get things done? You've asked for unity. You've asked for growth. You've asked for leadership. And ultimately, you've asked for a compelling reason why people should choose Cardano over Ethereum and Solana. This proposal is the beginning of answering those questions. If you vote no because you don't have 100% of everything answered, do understand what you're effectively saying is, unless we have perfection, we can't do anything. In which case, none of this makes sense. None of this makes any sense at all. We should just pack up shop and go home. Because, Vitalik Buterin didn't have the answers when the DAO hack happened. He just went with it and figured it out. And it totally didn't have the answers when FTX collapsed. He just figured out. Brad Garlinghouse didn't have the answers when the Securities Exchange Commission sued them and personally went after him and Chris and the others. Bill Gates didn't have all the answers when he got a phone call from IBM and they were angry because the guys that they sent to IBM to build their operating system for their computer decided not to sign the NDA, and they had to scramble and buy DOS to fix it. And Steve Jobs didn't have the answers after Lisa was a failure. Okay, all great ecosystems and all great leaders, they don't have 100% of the answers up front. Entrepreneurship is about the right governance structure, the right mindset, and the right agility to get where you need to go. And when you look at a plan like this, you're saying, well, we know for a fact we need these things. And the question is, can we get it done or not? Who else besides the largest entities in the ecosystem that collectively control all the software can do this? We're the only ones. Adapt can try, but the odds are they're going to get taken advantage of, and they can't make guarantees about roadmap items. Whereas collectively, because all the engineers and influence and capital is Nexus tier, we have the best shot to get that done. And if we're successful there and we've built the right governance structure, we can basically build up a much more elegant and beautiful strategy about how to put things together. And that's the time to haggle and negotiate. But once it's done, it's done. And then you have clear KPIs, the aggregators. We can set things like we want $250 million worth of Bitcoin on Cardano's ledger by X date, as an example, or the same for XRP, as an example. We can look at the DApp and DeFi ecosystem and say maybe one of our KPIs is half of the showcase dApps are listed on at least one tier one exchange, as an example. It's a negotiation. It's a back and forth. And you look at these KPIs, we can religiously track as a dashboard the monthly active users, the TBL, the TX. And then you have these things to aggregate. You know, what's the output of the hackathons? You can look at that. You can measure that and say, how many new engaged active developers do I have in my ecosystem every month, every quarter, every 6 months, every year? That's how you get things done in a nutshell when you look at this stuff. And it's the same when you look at a Discord or another aggregation point. Why do we aggregate in a channel we own? Because then we can broadcast to everybody. And maybe we build a decentralized one using PubSub. That's okay too. And maybe somebody wants to take the lead and we give delegated authority to them. But the point is, once it's there, then there's a single source of truth. And then there's a great culture for all of this stuff. You see? So this is a strategy. And this is a compelling reason because you'll notice something, that this strategy doesn't require the election of a king. It's delegated authority on behalf of the governed that can be revoked at any time. And it is built in consultation with the totality of the ecosystem as a whole. So unlike Steve Jobs with the Lisa recovering to the Mac, unlike with Jeff Bezos at the collapse of the dot-com boom and bust, trying to figure out how to restore Amazon, unlike Bill Gates trying to scramble to figure out how to solve a problem about the operating systems, there's not a guy at the top and you say, I hope he figures it out. It's a collaborative endeavor with checks and balances and enough actors there. And actually, everybody's a member at the end of the day. You can join Intersect and be a member of that organization. The majority of the board of Intersect is community elected, which means Intersect is a community organization. It's out of its transition phase. You see, and that's the difference between us and Ethereum and Solana and even Bitcoin. Bitcoin is anarchy. There's no governance structure at all. So it's frozen in time. The best it can do is to be a giant pool of value, and that's fine, but it's never going to be a smart contract stack. It needs someone else to do that for it, which is why Bitcoin DeFi exists. And Ethereum, it's still heavily reliant on the brain trust of a small handful of entities, and there's no on-chain governance structure if those entities let the ecosystem down to replace them. Whereas at least in this structure, the Pentad is elected, and then it does stuff. And if it doesn't do the right stuff, then we know that that's not going to work. We can pivot and we can change because ultimately the power is vested in the DREVs. The Constitution is very, very clear about this. You can give delegated authority to somebody, but the ultimate authority always belongs to the ADA holder in the structure. And I think that's the way we should do it. You know, it was the bet that I made. We have the funds to do this as an ecosystem. And we can give people a good reason to believe that Cardano can grow and 10x in terms of its community size, in terms of its MAU, in terms of its TVL. Because look, it's not a technology problem. Vitalik today wants Solidity to look like Haskell. He's wanted liquid non-custodial staking for a while. If this chain split happened on Ethereum, there would be billions of dollars of losses of bonded Ether. There's $0 of loss for the pledge for Cardano because of the way our proof of stake protocol worked. We can recover from massive incidents as if it never happened. This is a USP of our ecosystem. And the more that people learn, the more in love with the technology they're going to become. And then ultimately, I think people are going to realize that Cardano is the way to go. But we need the commercially critical integrations. We absolutely need to take care of those who put their careers and livelihood on the line for Cardano. And we need to do a better job as an ecosystem elevating them up, because they're going to be the number one source of jobs. They're going to be the number one group of people at the events broadcasting and advertising our ecosystem. And ultimately, they're going to be the ones who end up taking care of the protocol long term. If you have 15 great dApps and we take care of them, we can mandate that they have to give 1 or 2 full-time engineers to take care of core technology. And if 15 turns to 50, you have 100 full-time engineers from the community to take care of the technology. They got to pay it back. Just like SNEC took a loan, you got to pay it back. We can do the same in that strategy. So I think we can figure this out together. I want to figure this out with you guys, but this is what it means to grow up and to focus on first principles. We have to say what makes us special, what makes us unique, and where does our source of power come from as an ecosystem, and make ourselves different. This would never happen with Vitalik and Ethereum. It's just not how they operate. This would never happen with Solana. It's not how they operate. They have these conversations behind closed doors. They have these conversations in very obscure meetings. And even if they're open to the public, they're not really saying things in such a frank way. Here, I'm just straight up broadcasting. And everybody can listen and everybody can see, and they can all have an opinion. And some people are right and some people are wrong, and some people are critical and some people aren't critical. And you know what? The sun gets up. People have already voted no on the Pentad structure. That's their prerogative and their decision. There's no retaliation there. There's no like, how dare you do that? It's just their opinion, and their D-reps can decide if the principled stance is what they stand for or not. But we're just moving forward, and we say, look, we need to get this done. And Midnight Foundation is barreling down, and they had this choice: is it midnight only or midnight in Cardano? We found a structure to make it midnight in Cardano, and now I want to find a structure to supercharge the Cardano DeFi ecosystem and make it the fastest growing DeFi ecosystem of 2026. The technology is ready for it. When you look at Leos and Hydra and Starstream, we have all the USPs there, and I think we can focus on a lot of these long tail markets, and we can wake up and we'll be a Leviathan by the end of 2026, and we'll exit the year super, super strong. And this executive function is sufficient to get us there. So then we need to negotiate with the other Pentad partners, and I think we can get them on board. But ultimately, it's a voluntary thing. People have to agree that this is a good idea. So food for thought. Digest it, ruminate on it. We still have plenty of time for the current Pentad proposal. I'm not slowing down, though. We're negotiating deals, and we're getting them done. And you're going to see some announcements this month. I'll be in Abu Dhabi. Maybe we'll have an announcement there at Finance Week. That'll be fun, and more to come. And I'm not going to stop until we get these integrations in, because we need them as an ecosystem. It's long overdue, but that's necessary but not sufficient. We need to do more to get the ecosystem where it needs to go. So look for that. Thanks, everyone.